Okay, so we've been talking about effects, but in this lesson, we're going to start talking about layered effects or effects that go on top of other effects or effects that superimpose or key out or whatever you want to call it. But we're going to talk about how effects go onto upper layers. So we're going to build a sequence here, Command Shift N, and we're going to build a sequence. We'll put this in a new bin. We'll call that new bin sequences, and maybe we'll call this sequence layered effects. So we're working with some different footage this time. I figured I'd change some things up a bit. Make a sequences bin, and we'll save all these bins. And so cool, these bins are saved. All right, so I'm going to work with this interview clip of this woman named Virginia. We have this woman here named Virginia talking about doing yoga with goats. I know, it's going to be fun. Just do me a favor, let me know what your name is.
Virginia Lennon.
Virginia Lennon. Virginia, tell me, how did you get involved with yoga with goats here at Oasis?
I was approached by Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis, about a year ago, and there was this big phenomenon in the West Coast with goats with yoga, and I've been teaching yoga here with the student interns. So she thought, yoga teacher, goats, why not try it?
All right, so we have that little soundbite. That's 24 seconds. We're going to put some stuff in there, and we're going to cut away to some stuff in there. Now, I noticed that in this recording, there's some background noise here. I don't know if you heard that, but there's two channels here of noise, and one is a clean channel.
So we started.
And one is the noisy channel. So I think the channel 2.
Last year.
Yeah, 2 is the clean channel. So what we're going to do here is we're going to patch 2 to 1 because it just feels easier that way. And I'm just going to overwrite this clip down to the timeline. I have nothing else in the timeline. So I'm going to choose to overwrite. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. I'm going to overwrite the clip onto the timeline and splice that in. And I am going to throw up my 2 layers of audio here. So we're going to go to composer settings, or my 2 layers of, composer settings at the bottom here. And I want 2 rows of data and 2 rows of buttons, just because it makes me feel better. Cool. And so I have my 2 rows of data, 2 rows of buttons there, and I have this clip here like so. Now I'm going to make a new video track. So I'm going to hit Command Y, or go to the timeline and go to new video track, shortcut Command Y. Do like that shortcut, and I have Virginia here like this.
I was approached by Mike Cleary, the president.
And this is much cleaner because this is the lavalier mic that's on her. So this is channel 2, which is the lavalier.
I was approached by Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis.
All right, so she has a reference to Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis, and we have some footage of Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis. So we're going to go to frame mode here, and we're going to look for some of the footage that is of Mike Cleary. I got to see what she looks like and remember what she looks like and see if I have this footage somewhere. There's a nice shot of her. There's a shot of her we can use. She's kind of facing away, but we can use the shot here. Gets a little focus, and then it clears up a little bit. So we're going to grab it here. And I marked an endpoint where she references Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis, on the timeline.
Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis.
So right there, she references Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis. So I want to put this on track 2. So let me just open this up a little bit. Command Option, drag that. And we're going to go right here. And I'm going to patch V1 to V2. That's going to turn V1 off. And I'll turn the A1 off too, because I don't want to overwrite the audio. And so I'm going to overwrite this clip on here and have Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis, overwritten, 3-point editing, like so. Great. And so now this is just a simple cutaway. This would just be a simple upper level cutaway.
By Mike Cleary, the president of Oasis.
And there's a reference to her, but we decide for some reason we want to do this as a picture-in-picture. So we could go in here and we go into the effect palette and we could say, hey, let's use the resize effect. Let's go to image and let's choose resize effect. And if I use the resize effect, I can go into the effect mode button here and open up the effect editor, park on the resize effect and see the resize effect and say, yeah, let me scale this down. Let me scale down this image here and make it smaller. And when I make this image smaller, it doesn't show Virginia behind. It's just black back here. You can't make this transparent. You can't make this video. You can change it to a different color if you wanted to, but you can't really change this to anything else other than another color. And that's not what we want to do. And the reason for that is because the resize effect is kind of, I don't know, limited. Let's say limited. It doesn't do anything. It's an old effect. It was been since the inception of Avid, I think. It's been around for ages. And that effect doesn't really work to superimpose and a layer onto another layer. And so we want to look at effects that will do that. We'll superimpose. Now, there are a whole bunch of effects that are superimposed. You got to kind of almost figure out what they are. But for sure, any one of the ones in this category called blend, these blend effects will superimpose, put something else on top of something else, will layer effects. Some effects won't. Obviously, a lot of the image effects, like the color correction and the color effect and the flip and flop effects, a lot of these don't superimpose, but some of the shape wipes do. Will allow you to put a circle on top of a layer, and you can cut out a circle on top of a layer and have this cut into this in a circular shape. But let's start with simple, and let's start simply with the picture-in-picture effect. I'll tell you a story. A long time ago, I took an Avid class, and my teacher was talking about the pip. The pip. He kept saying the pip, and I was like, "What's a pip?" Eventually, like after like an hour, he kept being like, "And we'll put a pip on here, and a pip this, and we'll pip that, and do a whole bunch of pips." And I had no idea what a pip was. I felt like a dummy. Eventually, I had to ask, "Hey, what are you talking about?" "Oh, a picture-in-picture, a pip." Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, so we'll put a pip on here. It's fun. You get to crank out the microphone, a pip effect. There you go. And so little peep pops. It's great. So this effect naturally by default automatically resizes this down to 50%. So it automatically takes this layer and makes it smaller. And they do that just to let you know that, hey, look, there's a picture-in-picture here. Now, I want to show you a thing. I'm going to go into the effect editor, and effect mode brings up my effect editor. Here's my effect editor, and I have some controls. My effect editor, I could take my effect editor and park it somewhere. You know, put it here or something. Whoops. Put it there and have my effect editor opened up here like so. Let's just move this over a little bit more room on this side. And we'll see this here. So this will be just parked here. We can go scaling, and we can see that it automatically scaled this down to 50%. It does that by default. But now we want to move this. So we can grab this, and we can move this and say position. We're going to move this on the x-axis. That's the horizontal axis. And we can move this over here. We can click and drag this line and move this to basically there. Let's make it a little bit smaller, actually. Let's make it like 40%. And then we can put it up there, and then we'll make it, we'll drag it up on the y-axis. So negative on the y-axis, we'll drag it up to that corner. And now it's living here in this corner. So now when we cut to it, it's kind of like a news anchor picture-in-picture there. You know, today's top story.
The president of Oasis
shows up there and shows up there. Now, that's kind of cool. That's okay. If we wanted to, we could park in here, and we've talked about this before, doing quick transitions, and we could do like a 12 frame fade up here. And we just add in a 12 frame fade up, and then it would fade up like so. And so it would come in. There's my little fade up action. And there it was. This is all linked footage, by the way. I'm working with linked footage. So I haven't imported this footage. I haven't transcoded this footage. And you may see some dropout. You may see some issues the first time around doing this footage. But let's park on this again. And this is the benefit we talked about before about using footage that you transcoded, that using footage that Avid likes, because, you know, Avid will render it better. We're kind of, you know, flying wild and crazy right now and not using rendered footage. So now we can have this, instead of doing it this way, instead of doing a transition here, let's make this tidier. Let's do this way. We have a control here called foreground, and the foreground is basically the amount of there-ness, you know, it's the amount of superimpose. So let's park at the beginning here, and we'll park at the beginning. And actually, we're at 0 seconds. So this clip is roughly about two and a half seconds long here. So we'll go about a half a second in, about 12 frames in, and I'm going to add a keyframe. So I'm going to go 12 frame in, hit the quotations key, or hit this button and add a keyframe, and then I'll back up to the beginning, and I'll hit another keyframe, have to add in another keyframe. So at this keyframe that's highlighted, I'm going to bring this down to 0. So now we're keyframing. We're having a keyframe here that says the foreground level was at 100. At this keyframe here that we made, the foreground level is at 0, and obviously it fades up. And then it fades up. And it's kind of built in here. It's built in internally to the fade up. And so we can go to the end here. We can go to 202 or something. Add another keyframe, quotations key, apostrophe. And I can just take this keyframe, which is there. This is the same keyframe. And then we can say here, we'll copy this keyframe. We'll add another keyframe here, and then we can actually copy this keyframe. Command C on a Mac and Command V paste on a PC, and we'll paste all those attributes there like so.
The president of Oasis.
And then it fades up and fades out. So that would be an example of an effect we could do to have that be on screen and have it be like there like so. So let's get rid of that effect, and we can have this fade up and fade out. Let's grab this effect, and we can either park in this effect using the segment tools and grab it, grab the effect or something, or we could just hit the remove effect button and then remove the effect, and we're going to go back here, and we'll try going to the shape wipe. I know this can be a little cheesy, but we'll do the shape wipe. Let's choose the circle wipe just in case we want to have a circle, and so we'll have the circle here, and we'll put a circle there inside of here. Now we can obviously change the size of the circle. Let's go into effect mode. We can change the size of the circle. Now the circle has a control that says it goes from 0 to 100, so fully open to fully closed. By default, it left it at 50 and kept it there at 50. It also has a scaling control, so you could play with scaling. I sometimes tend to think of scaling when I want to do stuff like this and make an oval or make different shapes, but ultimately the foreground control is the overall size of it. So I don't know, you can use either one. This is just one button to use it. These are two sliders to use it. So we're gonna do it here. I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna reduce this down to maybe 35. So it's smaller. And I'm gonna put this here, and I'll take this and move the position of this circle over to here and over to here and have it there like so. So now we have Virginia Lennon happening like so. She's coming in there like there.
Mike Cleary, the president of Avid.
And we have a reference there. Now, the tricky thing is that this effect would have this layer, right? This circle layer, and the position controls the position of the circle layer, but doesn't control the position of the video. Now, what if I want to control the position of the video? Well, I could theoretically go and resize this effect. I could add a resize as well. And we're going to run into a problem here because the resize effect, if I option drag this, so if I auto nest this on here and add the resize effect on here, boom, and I try to resize this, I'm going to say, okay, let's resize this and let's move this over in position. It's going to move the whole thing over in position. And that is because this layer is on top of this layer. And since I put this effect on top of here, it's doing it to the whole thing. Let me give another example of this. I'm going to undo for a second. We're going to undo, get rid of that resize effect. Say, for example, I did a color correction effect, and I went to image, and I went to say something like, or even something like a flop effect. If I option dragged a flop effect on top of here, it would flop everything. It would flop everything. And that's because this effect is on top of this effect. If I wanted to resize just her inside of here, or if I want to add a color correction effect, again, color effect, we can go here and say, let's add the color effect, and let's say option drag the color effect on top. The layer would go on top of here. If I want to do that, and I said, let's just reduce the saturation and make this black and white, I make the whole thing black and white. And that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to do it this way. I want to do the color effect first and then do the circle effect. So what I want to do is undo this, get rid of my color effect here, and say, let's step into this and look at the original source layer. And now I'll take the original source layer of this layer of Virginia here, and I'm going to take this original source layer, and I'm going to say, yeah, let's apply the color effect onto this. Boom. And now I have a color effect. And now I could desaturate and have this here like there. And then when I step out, it's now desaturated just this. And that's the order. That's the order of operations of color effect first, circle second. If you double click and open this up, we talked about expanded nesting a couple lessons ago. Now you have the color effect inside of the picture-in-picture. Well, obviously in this case, I don't want to do a color effect. What I want to do is I want to resize inside of here. So I want to go to image, resize, and I want to move the contents of this layer position over. So it's kind of over there. Whoops, no, move it down. We'll move it to right wherever she is. It's moved too far a little bit. So we're going to move her. Let's do this. Let's go back to the circle effect. Let's say the circle effect, let's open it up super wide so we can actually see what the heck's going on here. And we want Virginia to be right around here. So we're going to go back to the resize effect. And here we're going to move Virginia basically to, whoops, we'll go in smaller increments here. We'll go down a little bit right there. And so Virginia's going to be right there. And that's where we want Virginia to be. We want her to be kind of there, living in there. And now when we add the 35% circle, now she's fitting into there. And now we can move the circle over so it's actually on her right there. And so now we could do it that way. And we could have the circle open up and circle close and do an animation like there. And so we can have that be as a separate layer there. So we have, again, so just so you can see, we have this effect moving her over and then this effect moving the circle over. And we can set the size of the circle to whatever size we want to, but we'd have to move this layer over to move the resize effect over, and so on and so forth. Gets a little bit complicated. It does. It gets a little bit complicated. Starting to hurt my brain a little bit. But we'll get some playful ideas here and some things that happen. So again, the circle effect is an effect that will superimpose. The resize isn't, but we're resizing first, and therefore it doesn't care. It doesn't matter what this is going on. I'm going to remove this resize effect and remove the circle effect. We'll remove effect, and we'll click here and remove effect, and now this is back to full screen. So now we have no effect going on here whatsoever. Let's go back to this blend picture-in-picture under the blend categories, the pip. It's fun to say, the pip, and we'll do this picture-in-picture again. So we'll make this again. We'll make this like 35%, a little bit smaller. And see, that's because this has all the position controls of the layer itself built into here. It automatically does it. It's a different effect, and so it does a little differently. We're going to move this to about 250. And move this up here to about negative 250. We'll just have this be here, just so we have exact numbers. Okay, so I'm going to do a thing where this kind of comes on screen, lands here. So instead of fading up, we're going to move to, again, like 12 frames, add a keyframe. We're going to add a keyframe here, quotations key. And we'll go over to the beginning, and we'll have this be off screen. So we'll just move the position of the X off screen this way. You could zoom out here and see that this is moving this off screen. We'll move this to like 700, maybe. Yeah, cool. Off screen. So now it's going to come here and going to fly on. Boom. Now, again, here, it'll stay on here till about 202. We'll go add a keyframe. And then at the end, we'll add a keyframe. And then we'll just copy this one and paste it over. Command C, click on this one, Command V, and paste and have it come off. So right now, we can zoom back in so we have this be regular full screen. It's going to fly on screen and then fly off. So this is how we're bringing this little clip in. We're having it fly on screen. It shows up. It flies up. Do we want to do this? I don't know. It's a little cheesy, but just for demonstration purposes. So, okay. So now we run into a problem. And I do want to talk about a problem that exists. A problem that exists inside of the way that Avid works. Not really a problem, just a thing to think about, really, I guess. If I go here and if I park here and I say, okay, I know I want to add, this is green on top of green, and it's really hard to see where the one thing ends and the next thing begins. It's really hard to make this out. I really want this to pop out, to stand out, to be superimposed. Well, I could use the border control, and I could click the border control, and I could raise up the border width, the border width here, and add some border, a little white border here. Big white border there. And I could change the color. I could double click in here and change the shade of blue or something. Maybe a light blue. And a blue border there. Fantastic. And I added a blue border there. Here's a problem, though. Here, when I go back to the beginning, I play this up and I play this and it goes. What happened there? Wow, that was weird. It went from no border and a weird colored border.
The president of Oasis.
And went, man, that's strange. So the border kind of showed up and then disappeared magically.
The president of...
And the reason why that's doing that is because I was only parked on this keyframe. I only had this keyframe highlighted in pink when I added the border. At this keyframe, no blue border. At this keyframe, no blue border. At this keyframe, no blue border. So it adds the blue border, going through an array of colors. We'll talk about that. And then it loses the blue border as we go. And that's a problem. That's, I mean, not a problem, but it's just not great. So what do I have to do? Well, I have to go back into every single keyframe and add that same blue border. Same width, same thing, same. I can't just copy the keyframe because then I'm going to copy all the properties. I'm going to copy the position properties, the crop properties, the scaling properties, the foreground properties. All of the properties get copied. And here's the problem. The problem is that when I go and I hit the quotations key, it adds a keyframe on the properties for all of this. And that's not necessarily what I want. That's not necessarily the way I want to go. So when I add a keyframe, I call this often what's called a global keyframe. And a global keyframe will add a keyframe on everything. Just add a keyframe to everything. And I want to show you how this looks. In other programs, in Adobe After Effects, it doesn't do this way. You add a property onto certain things. Well, if you open up this effect editor super duper wide, you will see that we're going to go to advanced keyframes. And when I add a keyframe, I'm just going to delete this one and add it again. Delete this keyframe and add it. It adds a keyframe on all of the properties. And now it's showing me that, oh, look, I have keyframes on all of the properties. And so I added a keyframe in all of the properties here, and in all the properties here, and in all the properties here. And I added a keyframe. Every time I add a keyframe here, by hitting the quotations key or hitting this, I add a keyframe to everything, and that's not cool. So we're going to take a moment just now while we're talking about layered effects. I think layered effects are pretty simple, but we're going to talk sometime about this thing called advanced keyframes. And in here, I have a control called advanced keyframes. And advanced keyframes, if you want to get really into effects editing and do some basic effects, you probably want to work in advanced keyframes. It looks kind of intimidating and scary at first, but man, you want to embrace advanced keyframes. So let's take a look. Let's do this animation again. Let's delete this. And we'll delete this, and we'll delete this, and we'll delete this, and we'll delete this, delete all these keyframes. And we're going to start here from the get-go here. And actually, I'm going to just take this picture-in-picture and drag it back down and replace it. And a picture-in-picture. Okay, so let's decide that we have a size for this. So we're going to size this out. So the scaling is going to be down to 35%, which is what we wanted. And we want this positioned over here. We said 250. And I'm just using the exact number so you can follow along. And then this was at minus 250. And so this was here and here. Okay, what do we want to do? We wanted to start here. At 12 frames in, half a second in, we wanted a keyframe for position. And which position are we moving? Well, we're moving the position of just the x-axis. So I'm going to hover over the x-axis. So here it says position x-axis. I'm going to hover over this line, and I'm going to park right here. And I'm going to say add a keyframe here. Now it adds a keyframe to the x-axis, and it also adds a keyframe to the column, the category of position. So there's position, x-axis. Look, it didn't add a keyframe to the y, and it didn't add a keyframe to any of these other things. None of these other things got a keyframe. Now I can go here and say, okay, on the y-axis, on the x-axis, add another keyframe at the beginning, and here I'm going to push this off screen. We said 700. Push this off screen. And now it's going to do the same animation. You're going to still see the same keyframes, except the same keyframes aren't affecting everything else. Which means if I do this and I say, you know what, 35 is wrong. Let me change the scale to 37 or to 40. Much bigger. Well, I can do that, and I didn't affect that at only this keyframe because there were no keyframes on the scaling. Now the whole thing is scaled up to 40. I go, oh no, that's wrong. Let's go back to 35. And I can keep changing this, and I don't have to do it for every single keyframe across the path. I can do it for certain keyframes there, like so. And so this comes in, and then here, we'll go to here, and I can hit quotations key, and boom, add keyframes across the whole thing, but I don't want to do that. I want to go through deliberately and park here and say, add a keyframe to this, only the x-axis. And again, at the end, I'll go to the end and add a keyframe here, just to this and this one. I can copy this keyframe, Command C, and go to this keyframe and Command V, and boom, boom. And then I have my animation to have this come on. Now, in this case, when I say, hey, I want to add a blue border, I add a blue border, and the blue border is not animated. There is no keyframes on the border width control. And on the border color, no keyframes whatsoever. So I can add a blue here, and this would be blue. Now, if I said, for example, at this point, I wanted this to transition from blue here, and while it's on the screen, it goes from blue to red or something. For some reason, I know this is silly, but we're just using examples here. From blue to red, I want to go from blue to red here and add this keyframe like there. I could do that on just the border color. So I'm going to go to border color, and I'm going to choose add keyframe here, and then I'll drag over here and say, at this point, let's go here, and we'll say add a keyframe here. So go to border color and add a keyframe here on border color. And in this keyframe, we're going to change this keyframe to red. Now, a weird thing will happen. We're going to change this to this color red. And you're going to notice it's going to do a weird thing. It's going to come on off screen. So it's going to come up blue. And then only at this point, it's going to change from blue to red. But probably it'll cycle through a whole bunch of colors. And this is a math problem. This is a graphical color math problem. So we don't want to do that. We just wanted to go from blue to red. We wanted to go across from here to here. So now we're going to have to get a little bit trickier. And this is a bit of a trick here. So here we're going to park here in blue, and I'm going to double click in here. And when I double click in here, I'm going to look at this blue color. And the blue values right now, the RGB values, let's say this is blue. The RGB values is 0, 85, and 255. This is what this is here. We can make a note of this. It is 0, 255. And so it's a lot of blue, a little bit of green. We could actually reduce the green to 0 and make it nothing. So now that's just perfectly blue. It's all blue. We want to go from red to green to blue and have it be like there. We want to have these controls there. Now we can look at these controls and say, okay, the hue is at 240. The saturation volume is at 240. 240 is this color blue. So we could have this be 227 or something. We could make it whatever color we want to do, as long as this saturation value are not changing whatsoever. So the saturation value are not changing. This is at 222. We want to move from 222 to 359. So we want to go from 222 to 359. That's all we want to do. We want to go just this way. We want to go from blue to a little bit of purple to red. So we're going to be this keyframe at blue. Again, 222. I'm just guessing that number. So it's going to be that shade of blue. And at this keyframe, we want it to go not to here. We want it to go to here. So it's going to go over blue to purple to red, which would make more sense. It doesn't have to go through all these yellow, green, orange colors here. We're going to go to 359 and have it be there like so. And so now that should do a nicer move from blue into red. A little bit of purple, but you get the idea. I mean, we're going to have to go to purple to get from blue to red, right? Because they're going to be a mix of the colors. That's a nicer move there. And we could do some other things here. We could say at this point, you know, maybe at this point here, we add some softness. And we could just say, hey, let's add some border softness to this. Border softness. We're going to add this control here at add keyframe border softness and say, okay, we're going to start adding some softness. Then we're going to add a keyframe here and say border softness, some soft border. And then here, we're going to add another keyframe, the softness, and we're going to undo that softness. Now, it looks like we have a whole bunch of keyframes here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 keyframes here. But those keyframes are only affecting certain layers. And that's the way other programs do it. I mean, that's the better way to do it.
President of Oasis.
I know, it's a cheesy effect, but it serves the purpose of explaining what's going on and how this is working. And so this idea of controlling advanced keyframes, the idea of having the ability to animate advanced keyframes, and then you can say, hey, I want to delete what the softness is doing. So I'm going to go to the softness controls and say, yeah, that's dumb. Let's click on these 3 keyframes. Let's grab all these guys right here and say delete, and I can delete these keyframes. I'm not deleting anything else. I'm not deleting any other controls in there. I can click on this color control because I don't want to do that. Delete that. And delete this one, and now it's not doing the color controls. It's just doing the fade on and fade off. It's just bringing this in with the fade on and fade off. It's just bringing this in like so, and we have that there. And so that's, you know, that's just a smarter way to do keyframes. Now, there's a couple of controls we have here. You'll notice down here, there's a button here that says add keyframe, and you can add keyframes here. So you could click here, somewhere in the timeline, and add a keyframe here, and it would add a keyframe there. But then it says this, it says add keyframes to active parameter, to open graphs, to enabled groups, so to open groups, to enable groups, to open graphs, or to all parameters. Well, by default, this keyframe is going to add keyframes to all parameters, which is what it's doing. Let's undo. There's several options, and I always get confused about these. So to active groups, to active parameter. Okay, so if I'm clicked on position, and I've just clicked on the Y position, that's a parameter. I can click here and say only add a keyframe to the active parameter. And now that it's set to active parameters here, now when I do the quotations key, I believe it will just add it to any of the active parameters. So now I just hit the quotations key and I add it, and it will just add it to whatever parameter I'm clicked on that's highlighted in blue. That's a quick thing. You can also add this to the active group. So you can say if there's a group that represents there. So if there's like the border, I could do it to the open group and say add a keyframe to the open group or to the active group. It would add a keyframe to everything under border. Or it could just add keyframes to anything that's open. So if there's any groups that are opened, only certain groups that are opened, I can say, okay, the border's open and scaling is open, but position and crop and foreground and control, because those are the only ones I'm messing with. I can say just add it to the open groups, and it would add just keyframes to the, you get the idea. I think you get the idea there. And so you have different options and different controls and different ways of manipulating this and there. Some other features about using advanced keyframes. We won't get into too much more of this, but some other features about active keyframes or about advanced keyframes. I'm going to click on this and delete this guy. Oops, where's my delete? Weird. Position, let's see. Good. Get rid of it. Cool. In here in position, I'm going to talk about some things about there. There is a control here. You see that right now I have the position controls. Let me open a position. And on the X position, I do have this little pull down right here. And this little triangle, this little disclosure triangle or twirl, shows me a graph of what's going on in terms of the changes. So right now, this is off screen at 700. It's going to go from 700 to 250. And then 250 to 700. So this is how this is moving. So it's showing me a graph of how this is moving.
Larry, the president of.
So if you're familiar with Adobe After Effects, Adobe Premiere, you're familiar with value graphs or speed graphs, and you're familiar with the ability to control graphs. Well, right here, we can right click in these keyframes, and you can just click anywhere in here, and you can change from linear, which moves from 700 to 250 at the standard rate of speed, however long it is, half a second, to go from 700 to 250. That's, I don't know, that's 450 over, right? Yeah, 450 over half a second. So it's going at 450 at a half a second speed. We can have it move like this, and it looks like this.
Larry, the president of.
There we go. We have that kind of animation. But if we wanted to, we could go in here and we could say right click and we could change to spline. And spline is kind of an ease. You're going to see the speed up. It's going to speed up and then slow down through the keyframe. So it's going to speed up.
Larry, the president of.
And so it kind of speeds up and slows down as it comes in and goes out. That's a natural little natural motion of spline animation there. Some controls there. That's kind of one of the nice features of advanced keyframes as well. We'll zoom in a little bit so we can see this a little bigger. Cool. We can actually drag this open, have this really be big, and see in here, and have this be really like this. And so we can have this spline animation. Great. And you can see the numbers there. We can also go here and say spline. We can choose Bezier. And now you can actually control the animation of how this thing moves. So you can have this be move like this, and it would do a real slow and then a real fast. It would come in really slow and then. There, you saw the very end second, it just came in really slow and then zoomed in fast. And you can control your own animation and make different kind of movements like there. You could even say, hey, let's do this. Let's add this picture in picture back in. We're going to do this one more time. Picture in picture here. And we want this to pop open. So we're going to, again, take this in position. And this is going to move position to, what do we say, 250 by negative 250. So it's in this corner here. We're going to reduce it down to 35%. And now we want this to have a border on this. We're going to add a border there. We'll change our border to a shade of blue. Whoops. Double click, and we're going to change the shade of border to a shade of blue, light blue. And we're going to have a blue border here. Great. And we want this to scale up. So this is going to scale up from 35. We're going to do this slowly. We'll have this a keyframe here. So we're going to do scaling on everything. So go to the scaling, add a keyframe. Cool. And then we're going to go here to this and add another keyframe at the beginning. And that keyframe is going to be at 0. So it's going to pop open and open up like this.
Larry, the president.
Open up. Well, what we could do is we could go to advanced keyframes here, for example, and we could say, let's go into this control here, the X control and the Y control. We'll zoom in a little bit so we can see a little bit closer. And we'll kind of move to here and see this a little bit better. Cool. We have this animation here. We could say right now it's doing this spline animation. We could do is we click on both these keyframes, and I'll show you a trick. We're gonna overshoot this. Hold on a second. Let me just open these up so you can really see this a little bit better here. Really want to appreciate this. So this is this animation that's going from 0 to 35. So right here it's going from 0 to 35. We have it going like there, just like this. I'm gonna grab both these keyframes and I'm gonna pull them up like this. And now what it's going to do is going to shoot over bigger than 35 and land back at 35. So it's going to kind of come into your face and back out. Let's see how that looks. That might be too aggressive, but we'll see how that animation works.
Larry, the
Boom. Oh, a little bounce there. See how it bounced open a little bit bigger. Playful. And that's only 2 keyframes.
Larry, the president of.
But this is some control that you have in advanced keyframes. Those are some things that you can do with the advanced keyframes controls. Some tricks like there. All right, we're going to step away from advanced keyframes because there's some other things you can do with advanced keyframes. Oh, I do want to talk about a detail really quick, a really quick detail that I want you to appreciate. A lot of people do this thing where they click in here and they drag in the timeline to move stuff around. And I want to show you what happens. For some reason, Adobe Avid, and I don't know how to turn this off, Avid Media Composer, when you click here, it automatically adds a keyframe. And so you click there and sorry, not scale. I want to grab this layer. So we'll grab this layer here and we'll grab this effect here and I'll grab this and I'll pull here and I'll move this over and it automatically adds a keyframe. So if you move it, it automatically adds a keyframe. I wish there was a way to turn that off. There's not. It's always going to add a keyframe. Every time you drag, it automatically adds a keyframe. If somebody knows how to turn it off, great, because I've been using it for years. And I've always said they grab it and say, no, I didn't want to move it. I just want to move it once. I don't want a keyframe to move. I just wanted to move it. Nope, add a keyframe. And it only adds a keyframe to the position. So a lot of times people will add a keyframe and be like, cool, I added a keyframe across the whole thing. And they didn't. They just added a keyframe to the position controls, which means that if you delete it, if you're deleting that keyframe, there are the position controls. You don't want to do that. You just have that there. That's always a wrinkle for me. I want to just be able to grab this here. I'm not animating position. Please don't add a keyframe for position, but it does every single time. Oops, I don't want to keep doing there. So here, boom. Again, that kind of control there. I have that basic ability inside of there, like so. And if you scale this here, it'll add a keyframe onto scale. So that's another important thing. So if I drag the edges and scale this and make this bigger by scaling it, it's going to add a keyframe for the scale. So anytime you directly grab to do a feature inside the screen, direct manipulation inside the screen, it's going to add keyframes for that direct manipulation. That's a thing to think about and a thing to consider, like so. I want to show you one other thing, and we'll talk more about effects as we go into future lessons, but I do want to talk about one other thing here in terms of effects. We're going to get additive effect mode. Click on the timeline to get additive effect mode. And we're going to be here, and we have this kind of here. I don't even know what I did now. Okay, so this is opening up and popping open, like so. If you ever go in, and if you ever want to look at any kind of effect that are layered, anything that will allow you to layer an effect on top of another effect or add some kind of layering of effects, if you go into expanded nesting, or even if you step in, if I step into this effect, it always adds two layers. One layer and then a blank layer beneath it. And it always adds this invisible layer underneath it. What is this invisible layer? I don't know. Here's what I do know. And I'll show you this in expanded nesting. If I double click, it adds two layers. Now, just for case in point, if I was to here and do, say, an image effect and did like a flop effect or something really simple, I step into this, it adds another layer right there. Here, it adds a layer and an empty space, What the heck is that empty space? I don't know what that empty space is. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what that empty space is. I know what it means, though. What it means is that this layer will allow to superimpose. This is a blank layer that says, hey, if there's nothing here, use V1 underneath it. If there's nothing in this, if there's a space here, it's adding a space to attribute, hey, we need a space to tell us that this layer will superimpose. So we talked about other effects, like other image effects do not superimpose. So if we added something like, say, a color effect here, if we open up the color effect, we can add the color effect and we go here. When you double click this, it opens up and just shows the layer. And that's just the one singular layer. But here, again, if we go and add the blend effect here and add the picture-in-picture effect, double click, it opens up this blank space. I don't know what this blank space represents. I don't know how it works. I don't know what it means, but it means that this effect will superimpose. So if you ever want to know if an effect will superimpose or allow a layer to be seen underneath another layer, yeah, what you want to do is here, and we can go into the shape wipes and go to the diamond wipe here and apply the diamond wipe, double click up, blank space. Blank space means it's going to allow this to superimpose over another layer. That's just a trick I know and just something I'm familiar with. And so you get kind of used to it as an idea. All right, so a couple more things. I want to look at one last effect, and this is kind of advanced, so take a deep breath. We're going to look at one last effect here. We're going to look at an effect here called 3D warp. What the heck is 3D warp? Well, a 3D warp is kind of like a picture-in-picture effect, or by default, let's be honest, by default, it's a picture-in-picture effect. And if you choose 3D warp, you can drag 3D warp on here. And this is one of Avid's signature effects. Here's what I think happened. I think Avid had a picture-in-picture effect, and I'm going to show this to you here. Avid had a picture-in-picture effect, and they added a picture-in-picture, and they said, hey, we want to have this picture-in-picture effect move in 3D space. We want to have this move into 3D space. So we're going to add some features to let this thing move into 3D space. Because right now, it's just a 2D thing. It can move on the x-axis. It can move the y-axis. It can't do much more than that. It moves in those kind of controls there. But Let's add an effect that allows it to move in 3D space. And then they add this effect that allowed this thing to move in 3D space and have some 3D controls. And then someone came along and said, hey, can't we throw like a crop in there? Because I think the picture-in-picture should have a crop in there as well. And they went, you know what? We'll add a crop control in here as well. And they added a crop control. So you could crop off the top half of this, or crop off the bottom half of this, or crop off the left and crop off the right. And see, there's a crop control built in there like so. And you have those features in there, simply enough. And then they said, well, let's add some more stuff in here. And they kept adding components and adding parameters to this and adding more things you can do with this effect. And this effect, the 3D warp, ends up being, I mean, by default, we have a scaling control. So we have a scaling control that you can reduce down to 50% size and you make it smaller. Great. We've seen that before. We can do that. We can add position. So we can move position on the x-axis. We can move position on the y-axis. But now we can also move position on the z-axis. We can move back into space and actually move past the frame there and move it back into space as though we're moving back into space. And just because we're nice, they also added little turn on and turn off. So there's a little turn on and turn off so you can see before and after. And here's a trick. If you hold in the Option key or holding the Alt key on a PC, you can, in fact, reset these. So you can kind of keep them on and then undo them, whatever you want to do, and you can move there. So we have the position controls, but now we also have a Z position backward and forward in space and back in there. Comes with the tracking control, which we haven't talked about, but we can. There's a whole bunch of other things that's in here. There is a highlight control. We can add a highlight onto this. And so we can highlight part of this layer and say, change the softness of the highlight to be more. We can change the intensity of the highlight, change the radius of the highlight to make it bigger. We can change the angle and twist it and then change the aspect of the angle. And then push where the X and Y axis are. We'll change the scaling back to 100% here, just so you can, or maybe 75%, so you can still see that it's still doing a picture-in-picture. And then you can, again, you can have a highlight control. Again, so you have that Option click. We'll put that back to normal. We'll turn that off with the little slider or with the little switch there. And then you have a highlight color. You have a low light color, so you can change actually how this thing highlights and what it does. There's a whole bunch of controls. You can add a shadow on the bottom of this. So there's a shadow control that is a shadow opacity and a shadow distance. So we can change the shadow opacity. So a little bit of shadow right here. Man, all these things that you can do with this, where it's positioned, where the shadow is positioned, so it looks like it's floating. Some random controls that you can do there. There's some cheesy ones. There's some super cheesy ones. The shape controls you can add in a page fold. Why do you need a page fold in effect? No idea. No idea why you need a page fold with this effect. But you can add a page fold. You now also have a rotation control. So let's undo the page fold. Let's get rid of the page fold. You can also switch this from page fold to a ball and have a ball with some curvature to it, so it looks very ball-like. Yeah, you want a crystal ball there. You can have a crystal ball. You can change the position of the crystal ball there. I know it's kind of silly. It's really silly, but you can have some fun with this. You can have some fun and do some crazy effects and do some things. There is even a chroma key inside of here. There's a chroma key that exists and a luma key that exists inside of here as an effect. I do want to talk about rotation though, because I do want to talk about rotation. There is a Z rotation, which allows you to rotate this way. Right? Option click, and we'll go back to regular. There's also an X rotation that allows you to rotate in the X axis. So you can rotate a bunch of times in the X axis there. I don't know, just because you want to. And there's lastly a Y rotation. So if this is the Y axis, you could rotate around or twist around the Y axis and rotate that way. It's a universal. And there's actually, beyond that, I know we're getting crazy now. Beyond that, there's actually controls for how this works. So you can hit this for the Z rotation and then directly manipulate the Z rotation by pulling this way. But guess what? Adds a keyframe, right? It's going to add a keyframe on this property. Same thing with X rotation. You have an X rotation. You can rotate the X. It's going to add a keyframe. Wish it didn't. Y rotation. You can add this. Y rotation. Rotate around. Adds a keyframe. So these are your direct manipulation controls. There's all kinds of things you can do. There's a crop control here. We can grab the edges and corners and crop down. If you really want to directly grab stuff in the screen and manipulate stuff in the screen with these different tools, you can use these different tools to get all kinds of different different keyframe stuff, different things you could do, different ways you can manipulate this in terms of animation. Here's the thing. When in doubt, you don't know which, you want to do some layering. You want to do some layering, honest to God layering. You want to do some layering and you don't know what effect to use. The 3D warp is probably your, look at all the controls. I mean, look at everything. There's tons of stuff in here and there's tons of other controls that we won't get a chance to talk about of how this thing works. You can change what's called the perspective, which means if you change the rotation on, say, the X and you change it to like there, you can basically take perspective and move the camera. So you can move the camera in the X-axis, which would move it like this. So this is moving basically the camera that's looking at it, basically. Notice that when it's centered, the slants go in, but when I change perspective, the slants go out as though I'm looking at it from an angle. So there's lots of games you can do to get really kind of crazy animation there. And again, all these animations, man, they have, if you start to add keyframes, you can add keyframes to different groups or different parameters. And if you add keyframes, you can play with the graphs and you can manipulate it like so. And so there's a lot of things in here, a lot of controls you can do. There's corner pinning. If you know anything about corner pinning, if you ever used corner pinning in Adobe After Effects, there's a corner pinning control so you can put something on a layer. Explore, expand, and just see what you can get out of this and what you can do with this. This is Avid's mightiest warrior, mightiest effect. It can do the most things, and so if you get a chance, play with it. It's a good time there. So that's a little bit into layering. There's some other tricks we can do with layering. We can talk about keys later on. We can talk about chroma key and luma key and some matte keys. We can talk about animat and all those kind of things. That may be a future lesson, but for now, we can put layers on top of other layers, on top of other layers, and have multiple layers on top of each other. Just remember, you have to pay attention to that render order thing. So as a reminder, just as a review, really quick review, if you do a picture-in-picture like this, boom, and you want to add something inside to this image, you're going to have to step in. You're going to have to step in to add, say, a flop effect. Again, image flop effect. It's going to be inside here because you want to flop this. You didn't want to flop Virginia. And so you don't want to flop that other thing there. And quickly, lastly, as a reminder, if we wanted to, we can save any effect that we do. So we can make a bin, make a new bin here called cool effects for goats. And we can save this picture-in-picture, whatever we do to this picture-in-picture, we add a border, we animate it, we do something, you can add this. And I'll show you two tricks really quickly. We have time. I'll show you two tricks really quickly that you can do. So let's say, for example, we're going to do this again. We're going to take this, we're going to make this a blue border. And I'm going to show you something. I'm going to take this, I'm going to lower this down to 35%. And we're going to move this over here. Again, I'll put this at 250, and I'll put this at negative 250 here, boom, like there. And I'm going to go here, and I'll go 12 seconds in, or 12 frames in, and I'll add a keyframe. And I just add a keyframe across the whole group. And you're like, oh my God, Chad, but you said don't add a keyframe across the whole group. What are you doing? Why would you do such a thing? Well, because I'm a crazy person. Like that's the honest answer, because I'm a crazy person. No, because I'm lazy. And so sometimes you're like, man, I just want to add this effect really quickly. And so I'll just add a keyframe across the whole group because I don't want to go in here and drag and right click and it's a pain in the butt. I'm not being a good person. I'm not labeling all my stuff. I'm not doing this properly. If I want to do this properly, I'll do it here. Do I sometimes just add a keyframe across the whole group? Yeah, sometimes I do. Sometimes, sometimes I don't, I don't floss, sometimes I don't, I don't know, clip my nails every 2 weeks or something, whatever your habits are. Sometimes I'm not really great at maintaining good editing habits, and I'll just do stuff really quick and easy.
The president of
But here, again, see, I'm quick to just add a keyframe right there. It's just so convenient. The quotation is key. Shortcuts make everything so much easier. But, if you really want to be good about your keyframes, Command C, Command V, copy, boom, there, like so. So we can have this little blue box come onto the screen. Great. We have this little blue box come on the screen. We have this there like so. And we could take this and we could save this effect right in here into my cool effects. We'll drag the icon here, this little icon here, and call this, blue pip slide. And have this here, blue pip slide. And so now if I have some other thing here, where's another clip, I can go here.
And there was this big phenomenon in the West Coast with goats with yoga And
so now I have this big phenomenon in the West Coast with goats with yoga. So now we're going to get some footage of people doing yoga with goats. Some footage of people doing yoga with goats. Let's find a good cut of some people doing yoga with goats. That's okay, I guess. Show something better here. That's much better. There we go. Get some people doing yoga with goats. Again, we'll overwrite this onto here, and so boom. And now I can just go to my awesome effects here and add blue pip slide, and then boom, it automatically adds it in. And this is elastic keyframe, so it's going to add this at a different speed.
With goats with yoga, and
so I can do that. I'll show you one more trick, and this is the last thing I'm going to show you. The one more trick you can do. So if I'm here, and say for example I had something that was fantastic, like I'm going to use this clip again and again. I'm going to use this clip with this effect. So I want this clip with this effect. I'm going to keep referring to this woman named Mai again and again, but I want to refer to her with the clip, and I want to do the effect with the clip, and I want to have that kind of working as an idea. Here's the thing I can do. If I go to this effect, and I click and I hold in the Option key, the Alt key on a PC, and I drag this over here, it's going to add the pip. It's going to say picture in picture. Sorry, here it'll say picture in picture. And then here it'll say picture in picture with source. With source. And that means it's actually a video layer, which means when I grab this, it's actually the video here with the effect. And so it comes in as an effect with the video built inside of it. So if I was going to use the same video again and again with an effect, you can actually have an effect with the source video that it refers to, and it will be a clip, basically. It basically operates like a clip. It's sort of a clip. And so now I can take this and put this, say, here, take this whole clip and say, yeah, I want to put this right here, mark in point here in the timeline, overwrite this, and I'll bring in this clip again. And it's the same thing.
Student interns. So she thought,
if I want to do that, that's the thing I could do. That's a trick I could do. That's just some things you can do with effects. We'll play with more of the effects. We'll play with some other things. We might play with some other ideas inside of Avid as we go, but that's gonna be that for there. Again, I told you that was the last thing I was going to show you for today. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed. Again, play with some effects, play with that 3D warp, play with all kinds of effects, find something else out new that I didn't know how to do. Cool.